Karen didn't just drive across my farm. She broadcast it, phone held high sunglasses flashing in the sun, chagrined into her live stream as her Lamborghini shredded fresh rows of soil. Comments poured in hearts floating across the screen while my animals scattered in panic. To her, it was contempt. To me, it was destruction. Live-streamed mockery on my own land. I stood there on the porch, fists clenched, watching my hard work trampled for likes and laughs. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Enough warnings, enough patience. If Karen wanted an audience, I'd give her one a show she'd never forget. Every reckless drive she filmed would lead straight to the climax I was already planning in my head. This wasn't just about trespassing anymore. It was about respect, and Karen was about to learn that the land always gets the last word. Before we dive in, tell me your city and local time in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from. Karen's live stream kept playing in my head long after her Lamborghini's roar faded over the ridge. She'd waved at her followers' hair, whipping in the wind, shouting into her phone like my farm was nothing but a backdrop for her personal reality show. The screen was filled with comments, laughing emojis, people egging her on Queen of the County roads. That farmer looks so mad, LOL. My land, my livestock, my blood and sweat reduced to internet fodder. I'd stood on my porch that day, gripping the railing so tightly the old wood cracked beneath my hand. This wasn't the first time she'd driven through, but it was the first time she made me the villain in her little circus act. And that's when something hardened in me. My patience had already worn thin, but seeing my life turned into content for her amusement broadcast to thousands. Well, that snapped the last thread. I knew right then that Karen wasn't just trespassing. She was taunting. She wanted me angry, wanted me humiliated. The truth was I'd tried the polite route. I waved her down weeks ago, right at the edge of the property line. I'd pointed to the faded wooden sign that said, in clear black paint, private property, no trespassing. She laughed, revved her engine, and told me her GPS had brought her this way. Maybe don't put your farm where people need shortcuts, she sneered before ramming the gas and disappearing in a cloud of dust. At first, I wanted to believe it was a mistake, some HOA type who didn't know the back roads cutting through to shave off a couple minutes. But when she came back the next day blasting music, I knew better. By the third time, she was bringing friends. By the fourth, she was live streaming. Each visit left behind torn fencing, broken posts, and patches of trampled crops. My cattle spooked at the sound of her engine. One of my goats limped for a week after bolting into a ditch. I did what I thought I was supposed to do. I called the sheriff's department, explained the situation, even left voicemails with pictures of the damage. One deputy told me trespassing was hard to prove unless I had video evidence. Another shrugged and said, "You know how those HOA folks are always stirring up drama?" Their tone made it clear I wasn't getting help. It was my word against hers. And Karen's word carried more weight in this county. She was part of a homeowners association from a wealthy gated community just down the road. Money buys influence, influence buys silence. So, it was up to 'em. And if Karen wanted to turn this into a show, I was going to write the script. I started watching closely. And noticed she always came in the afternoons, usually Fridays or Sundays, right before golden hour when the sun made the fields glow. She wanted the best lighting for her streams. She always dressed the part too bright colors, oversized earrings, makeup cake thick enough to shine on camera. She wasn't just driving across my farm. She was staging her own runway. That runway gave me an idea. The back pasture had a low stretch just past the corral. When it rained, the ground softened quick, the clay holding water like a sponge. I remembered the time one of my tractor shads sunk up to its axles there. Took 2 machines and half a day to pull it out. Karen always chose that path. It was the smoothest cut across my land. If she wanted easy, I'd give her easy, too easy. I spent a week preparing quietly after chores were done. I brought out my old ATV after dark tools rattling in the back. I set up sprinklers beneath straw and dirt rigged to a timer and a remote I could keep in my pocket. I mixed in clay and fertilizer to make the ground just unstable enough, masked it all with fresh topsoil and grass clippings. I tested it with a hay bale, rolled it into the center, watched it sink, slow, steady, helpless. Perfect. I called it my welcome mat. Every day after that, I waited. Every sound of an engine made me tense. I kept my phone ready, cameras angled at the pasture and my thumb always near the remote. But Karen didn't come for 3 long days. Nothing. Just cicadas and the rustle of wind through the corn. I almost thought she'd moved on board of her little game. Then on the 4th evening, I heard at the thumping bass echoing across the hills, the low snarl of that Lamborghini engine. I stepped outside, leaning against the fence post like I had all the time in the world. Dust curled on the horizon. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat, but I kept my face calm, almost bored. And there she was, Karen grinning behind oversized sunglasses, phone lifted high, already lived to her followers. Her caption probably said something smug like, "Shortcut Queen strikes again." She shouted into her camera, "He's out here again, y'all. Old farmer can't stop me." She laughed, waving at me like I was part of her show. Not this time. Her car barreled down the slope tires, cutting through the same stretch she always used. My hand slipped into my pocket thumb, brushing the remote. 30 yards, 2010. She didn't slow down, didn't even glance at the sign nailed to the post. I pressed the button, a faint hiss in the distance, then silence. For a second, nothing happened. The Lamborghini glided forward, smooth as ever, her laughter echoing. Then I heard it, the wet-sucking slop of earth giving way. The rear tires sank an inch. Then, too, Karen's laughter stopped. Her head jerked forward. She gunned the accelerator. That was her mistake. The wheels spun, flinging mud into the air, carving deeper ruts. The engine roared, but the car lurched only once before, stalling nose dipping slightly as the ground swallowed it whole. Her phone wobbled, but she kept streaming her followers, now watching panic replace mugness. She cursed, flinging the door open, only to plunge both feet straight into the muck. Her scream echoed across the field as mud and manure splashed up her designer leggings. She tried to move, but each step dragged her deeper. The more she struggled, the more ridiculous she looked. Her audience was eating it up. The comments must have been merciless. And me, I didn't say a word. I just folded my arms, leaned against that fence, and let the camera on my barn roof keep rolling. This wasn't revenge. This was consequence. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't felt since she first tore across my land. Peace. Karen flailed in the muck, shrieking as the Lamborghini's engine sputtered and died. The headlights flickered against the settling dusk, casting strange reflections over the wet clay. Her phone was still in her hand, though the screen was now smeared with mud, the stream wobbling wildly as she tried to keep it above her head. The chat must have been exploding, some laughing, some egging her on, some warning her she was sinking. I didn't need to see the comments to know. I could hear the rising hysteria in her voice. "This is sabotage!" she shouted, slipping as her stiletto heels vanished under the surface. He did this on purpose. Her accusations rolled across the field, but there was no sheriff to hear them. No HOA board to run to. Just me leaning on the fence post, arms folded, watching her thrash in the very soil she'd mocked. The Lamborghini was sinking slowly, not like a dramatic movie crash, but worse, inch by grinding humiliation. Its pristine white paint now stared with dark brown splatters, the once polished hood beginning to bow under the strain of the muck. Every spin of the wheels only dug it deeper, spitting slop in wide arcs. I could smell the mix of wet clay and fertilizer drifting across the pasture. Karen's face twisted from shock to rage. She turned toward me, pointing her mud-caked phone like a weapon. "You'll pay for this, farmer. This is a $150,000 car. You've just committed a felony." I raised one eyebrow, deliberately calm. "Trespassing still illegal in this county. Last I checked, I said my voice even. And you've been live streaming the evidence yourself." Her jaw dropped. She spun her phone to face the car, then back at me, trying to regain control of her audience. "Y'all are witnesses. Look at this psycho. He trapped me. This is entrapment." I almost laughed at the irony. The word rolled off her tongue like she'd picked it up from one too many courtroom dramas. But the truth was, no trap had been laid. Just a field behaving exactly the way a field does when watered and worked. Nature was the one teaching her this lesson. I'd only nudged it along. She tried to climb onto the hood, thinking she could crawl across and reach drier ground. For a moment, she actually looked triumphant, crouching on top of her sinking car like a general surveying a battlefield. Then her left foot slid slick with runoff, and she landed flat on her side in the mud. The sound was wet, final, humiliating. She screamed again, half fury, half despair. That's when headlights appeared at the ridge. Not Karen's friends this time, but a local pickup truck. My neighbor Harold had seen the dust and wandered over to see what the commotion was. He stopped at the fence line, rolled his window down, and chuckled. "Evening, Tom," he called to me. "Looks like your field swallowing a whale." Karen whipped her head toward him, her hair plastered to her cheeks. "Help me call a tow truck." This man's insane. Harold just spat a stream of tobacco juice out the side of his truck and laughed harder. "Reckon the earth finally got tired of your nonsense, lady." Then he drove off, taillights glowing red in the dark. Karen's fury doubled. She flung mud in my direction, though it fell short, splattering on the fence. "You think this is funny? I'll sue you into the ground." I took out my own phone, raised it just enough for her to see the red recording light. Go ahead, I said. But you've been broadcasting your own trespassing 4 weeks. I've got timestamps, videos, even complaints filed with the sheriff. You've made my case airtight. Her expression faltered for the first time. Fear crept into her eyes, though she masked it quickly with another wave of indignation. She tried to march forward, but her designer boots stuck, and with a sickening squelch, one came off, left behind in the muck. She stumbled barefoot into the slop, squealing in disgust. "Stop filming!" she screamed, holding her ruined shoe aloft like a trophy of outrage. But I didn't stop, and neither did the strangers on her live stream. Comments were probably rolling in faster than she could read, capturing every stumble, every shriek. Some part of me wondered if this humiliation would sting more than the ruined Lamborghini. Minutes stretched and the car sank deeper until its rear bumper kissed the mud. Karen, now covered in filth up to her waist, finally dragged herself toward the edge of the field, panting and swearing. When she reached the fence, she clutched the wooden post like a lifeline, glaring up at me with wild, desperate eyes. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You think you've won?" "I have lawyers. I have money. You're nothing but a farmer with dirt under your nails." I leaned closer, my voice low enough for her to hear, but calm enough to cut through her rage. And yet, here you are, stuck in my dirt with the whole county watching. Her face flushed crimson beneath the streaks of mud. She sputtered, searching for words, then finally shoved past me toward the gravel road where her friends had parked earlier. She didn't even look back at their car, now sinking like a monument to arrogance in the middle of my field. As she disappeared into the night, I exhaled a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. For the first time in weeks, the land felt quiet. No engines, no bass rattling the windows, no sneering. HOA Queen treating my home like her racetrack. Just the hum of crickets and the slow settling of mud. I turned back toward the Lamborghini, its headlights dimming as the battery faltered. It looked almost peaceful, half buried in the earth like some ancient relic swallowed by time. A fitting tombstone for Karen's pride. I pulled out my phone one last time and took a still photo. Not for revenge, not even for proof, just to remind myself that sometimes the land defends itself if you give it the chance. And as I walked back toward the farmhouse, the stars winking into view overhead, I couldn't help but smile. Tonight, justice hadn't come from a badge or a courtroom. It had come from the soil beneath my boots. The next morning, awoke before sunrise, as I always do, the smell of coffee drifting through the kitchen. My routine never changes much. Feed the animals, check the fences, walk the fields. But that morning felt different. There was a stillness in there, the kind that comes after a storm. I stepped out onto the porch, mug in hand, and looked across the land. Out in the low pasture, the Lamborghini still sat where Karen had abandoned it, half buried in the mud. Its once pristine white frame was stained brown windows, streaked the hood dipped forward like it was bowing to the earth. I couldn't help but chuckle into my coffee. The scene looked like a piece of performance art. Nature had painted its own brand of justice, and the whole county had been invited to watch. By mid-morning, news had spread. That's how small towns work. Harold, my neighbor, was probably the first one to spread it. He'd driven by the night before, and no doubt stopped at the diner afterward to tell the story. By the time I went into town for supplies, people were already whispering some, laughing openly. A couple of teenagers leaned on their bikes outside the hardware store and asked, "Hey, mister, that true? You buried a Lamborghini in your field?" I didn't bother denying it. I just shrugged and said, "Sometimes the dirt bites back." By noon, the videos were everywhere. Karen's live stream had been saved, copied, clipped, and reposted across social media. Some smart aleck even added dramatic music over the part where she slipped face first into the mud. Another slowed down the moment her shoe got stuck, replaying it in a loop with captions that read, "Karma in action." Within hours, it had millions of views. That night, the local news station covered it. They played a montage of Karen's stream alongside commentary about respecting rural property. The anchor, a woman who usually covered school board meetings, was barely hiding her grin as she read the script. I sat in my recliner sipping iced tea, watching Karen's empire of arrogance collapse in real time. But Karen wasn't going quietly. 2 days later, I found a crisp envelope in my mailbox delivered by a courier in a too-tight suit who looked like he hated his job. Inside was a notice Karen was suing me for property damage, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and defamation. The letter read like bad theater, accusing me of setting booby traps and waging psychological warfare. There were screenshots of her covered in mud, her mascara streaked down her face. If I hadn't been so irritated, I would have laughed. Instead, I called Vic. Vic was an old buddy from high school now, a lawyer in the county seat. He owed me a favor or two, and besides, he loved a good fight. When he finished reading the complaint, he laughed so hard I thought I might choke. "She's suing you." With this, he waved the papers like they were confetti. "She trespassed, destroyed property, endangered your animals, and broadcasted it all herself. If anything, you should be suing her." So we did. Vic filed a countersuit for trespassing, destruction of property, and harassment. He added an itemized bill for the broken fence posts, the damaged soybean patch, and even the veterinary check for my goat. We attached the videos, both mine and hers, as evidence. Every frame showed her laughing, mocking, calling me a hillbilly while tearing up my land. The legal back and forth didn't last long. Her lawyer, some suburban guy who probably didn't know a John Deere from a Dodge, took one look at the public backlash and realized the case was a grenade waiting to blow up in their faces. Within a week, the lawsuit vanished. Karen's threats of financial ruin for me evaporated into silence. But the internet didn't forget. Clips of her humiliation spread further, reaching national feeds. A late-night host cracked a joke. "Tonight's top story, when life gives you Karen, sometimes the farm fights back." The audience roared with laughter. Karen had wanted attention, and she got it, just not the kind she craved. Meanwhile, my life changed in ways I hadn't expected. My niece helped me set up a page for the farm. I posted a single picture of the muddy Lamborghini with the caption, "Private property. Trespassers beware." It exploded overnight. Thousands of comments poured in. People calling me a legend, thanking me for standing up to entitled behavior. Strangers offered to buy me drinks, send me boots, even start a GoFundMe to compensate me for my troubles. I didn't need their money, but I couldn't deny the satisfaction. After months of being trampled on, ignored by authorities, and mocked, I finally had the upper hand. Not because I wanted fame, but because people saw the truth. They saw Karen for who she really was, and they saw me standing my ground. One evening, while feeding the cattle, Harold stopped by again. He leaned on the fence, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt, and shook his head. "You know, Tom," he said, "I ain't laughed that hard since Clinton left office. You gave this town a gift." I smiled, patting one of the calves on the flank. "Wasn't about making anyone laugh. Was about protecting what's mine." "Sure," Harold said with a grin. "But don't kid yourself. You also gave that woman a bath she'll never forget." Weeks passed. Karen disappeared from the roads. Word was she sold the Lamborghini at a loss. It was too damaged, too notorious. She started driving a dull gray crossover instead. Head down, no live streams, no smug waves. I saw her once in the grocery store. She kept her sunglasses on indoors, avoiding eye contact as she pushed her cart past me. For the first time, she looked small. And me, my farm was quiet again. No thumping bass, no roaring engines, no laughter echoing across the fields. Just the sound of wind in the crops, the steady rhythm of hooves, and the kind of peace you don't appreciate until it's stolen. Still, I left the sprinklers buried under the straw in that back pasture. Not because I expected her to return, but because Eamon can never be too careful. Private property is a promise, and promises deserve to be defended. When I leaned on that same fence post at dusk, watching the sun set over the ridge, I thought about how strange life can be. Karen thought she was invincible, armed with money status and a shiny car. But in the end, all it took was a patch of mud and the truth to bring her down. And that was justice enough for me. I should have known Karen wouldn't let humiliation sit quietly. People like her rarely do. The mud had barely dried in my pasture when whispers began to circle through town. Karen was plotting something bigger, something louder. I ignored most of it at first. The lawsuit had fizzled out. The Lamborghini had been towed away and my fields were healing. But then one evening while I was stacking hay bales, my phone buzzed with a text from my niece, Uncle Tom. Check this out. It was a link to a Facebook post. Karen's face plastered across the thumbnail, caked in heavy makeup lips, pursed in what she must have thought was determination. The caption read, "Exposing the psycho farmer who tried to kill me." Underneath, she'd written a rambling diatribe about how I had engineered a death trap and nearly drowned her in quicksand. She called me dangerous, unstable, and unfit live near a civilized community. I almost laughed, but as I scrolled through the comments, my smile faded. Some of her HOA friends were chiming in, agreeing with her, painting me as some backwoods menace who hated progress. They twisted the story, made it sound like Karen had been the victim of rural barbarism. That's the power of money and influence. They don't need truth, just a platform. By the next morning, it wasn't just talk online. I woke to the sound of hammering at the edge of my property. When I walked down to the fence, I found 3 men in reflective vests pounding stakes into the ground. A glossy sign leaned against their truck. Future site of Community Access Road. "Hold it right there," I barked, setting my coffee down on a post. "This is private property. What do you think you're doing?" One of the men wiped sweat from his brow and shrugged. "HOA permit, sir. Says, right here, we're surveying for a road extension." He handed me a clipboard with papers stamped in bright blue ink. At the top, the name Chestnut Grove Homeowners Association, Karen's HOA. It felt the heat rise in my chest. They weren't just trespassing anymore. They were trying to take my land. I spent the rest of the day at the county office, marching through hallways, waving that so-called permit in every clerk's face I could find. Turned out it wasn't a permit at all. Just a proposal filed by Karen herself, padded with signatures from her HOA cronies. No legal standing, no county approval, just intimidation dressed up in paperwork. But intimidation works if you let it. And Karen counted on me rolling over. Not this time. I went home and dug through my old filing cabinet, pulling out deeds, maps, surveyor reports. My farm had been in my family for 4 generations. The property lines were clear, the ownership undisputed. The land was mine, every acre. Still, I knew Karen's game. She didn't need to be right. She just needed to be loud enough to make my life miserable. That night, I called Vic again. He was already half laughing before I finished explaining. "She's trying eminent domain with HOA stationery," he said between chuckles. "That's not just stupid, that's art. Don't worry, we'll shut this down before it starts." But even with Vic's reassurance, I couldn't shake the knees. Karen was escalating, turning her personal grudge into a campaign. And campaigns, especially ones fueled by hoe politics, had a way of getting ugly. A week later, the ugliness arrived. I was walking the property at dawn when I saw tire tracks near the back fence, fresh ones wide and deep. My gut sank. I followed them into the soybean patch, and sure enough, the plants were shredded stems, snapped soil, churned like a battlefield. At the center of it all was a spray-painted message in lurid pink, "Stop the psycho farmer." I clenched my fists. This wasn't Karen live streaming for laughs anymore. This was sabotage. I spent the day repairing what I could, but anger gnawed at me like a restless dog. I could call the sheriff again, sure, but I already knew how that would go. Sympathy nods, shrugs, excuses. Trespassing was hard to prove, vandalism low priority. They wouldn't touch Karen or her crew unless I handed them proof on a silver platter. So I decided to make proof. I set up trail cameras around the property, hidden in fence posts and tree branches. I invested in motion sensors from the farm supply store, rigged them to lights and alarms. If Karen or her friends wanted to turn my land into their battleground, I'd meet them with surveillance. "No more," she said. "This time I'd have receipts." It didn't take long. 2 nights later, alarms blared near the north field. I grabbed my flashlight and sprinted through the dark boots, pounding the earth. By the time I arrived, the intruders were gone, but the cameras weren't. I pulled the memory card, slid it into my laptop back at the house, and there she was. Karen herself, hair tied back, hoodie pulled, low spray can in hand. She'd tagged another message across my barn door. "Justice for Karen." I sat back in my chair, staring at the footage. She wasn't just reckless, she was unhinged, and she'd just handed me everything I needed. The next morning, I drove straight to Vic's office. He watched the video, his grin spreading wider with every frame. "She's cooked," he said, tapping the desk. "We're not just talking trespassing anymore. This is criminal mischief, destruction of property, harassment. We can bury her in charges before she buries you in paperwork." For the first time in weeks, I felt the tension ease from my shoulders. Maybe the system would finally work the way it was supposed to. Still, I wasn't naive. Karen had money connections and a talent for twisting the narrative. She'd paint herself as the victim, claimed the footage was doctored spin lies for anyone who'd listen. But now I had something stronger than her voice. I had evidence, cold hard, undeniable. And if she thought mud was humiliating, wait until she saw what a courtroom could do. As I left Vic's office, I caught my reflection in the glass door. Dusty boots, sun-worn face hands, calloused from years of labor. I wasn't a man who looked for fights, but some fights come looking for you. And when they do, you either back down or you dig in. I chose to dig in because this wasn't just about mud or fences or even a Lamborghini anymore. This was about dignity, about protecting what generations of my family had built with their sweat and their hands. Karen wanted a stage, fine. But the final act wasn't going to end with her triumphant. It was going to end with truth. And I was ready for the curtain to rise. The county courthouse smelled like dust and old paper. The kind of place where time seemed to drag its boots through every hallway. I'd been there before, property tax filings, zoning disputes, but never like this. This time, I wasn't just a farmer trying to keep my head down. I was a man bringing a case, and the defendant, none other than Karen herself. Vic walked beside me, calm as ever, briefcase swinging at his side. "Remember," he whispered, "don't rise to her bait. She'll come in loud, emotional, maybe even in tears. Judges don't like theatrics, but they do like evidence. And you, my friend, have plenty." He wasn't wrong. The trail cam footage of Karen spray painting my barn door was clear as daylight. Her face caught in the glow of the motion light, her hand mid-spray hoodie slipping back, just enough to reveal the glittery earrings she always wore. Add that to her live streams of trespassing, plus the damage reports and photos of my fields, and we had a solid case. Still, my stomach twisted as we entered the courtroom. Karen was already there, seated at the plaintiff's table, surrounded by 2 lawyers in slick suits. She wasn't in mud-stained leggings this time. She wore a cream blazer hair, perfectly coiffed face powdered like porcelain. When she saw me, her lips curled into a smile that wasn't friendly. The judge called the session to order, and almost immediately Karen's lawyer launched into a speech about how I was a vindictive recluse who had waged psychological warfare against a prominent member of the community. He painted Karen as a victim of rural hostility, a woman just trying to enjoy her property rights and social freedoms. When it was Karen's turn, she stood and let tears slide down her cheeks, voice trembling as she described the trap I had set, how she feared for her life as her car sank. She clutched the courtroom like it was her live stream audience. And for a moment, I wondered if the judge might buy it. Then Vic stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture or dramatize. He simply queued up the footage from the trail cam and pressed play. The courtroom watched as Karen, very much alive and unafraid, vandalized my barn door with bright pink spray paint. The sound of the spray hissed through the speakers. Then came her live stream clips, laughing, mocking, tearing across my property with reckless abandon. Vic paused the video at the moment. She shouted, "He can't stop me!" The silence afterward was thick. Even the judge leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vic said smoothly, "this isn't a case about a farmer tormenting a woman. This is a case about a woman who thought she was untouchable until the evidence caught up with her." Karen's face drained of color. Her lawyers fumbled, whispering frantically, but there was no spinning what everyone had just seen. The judge cleared his throat. "I've seen enough for today, Miss Karen. This court will not tolerate harassment, destruction of property, or frivolous lawsuits. Consider this your warning. If further complaints are filed against you, criminal charges may follow." Bang! Gavel down! It was over, at least in the legal sense. Karen stormed out her heels, clacking like gunshots against the marble floor. I stayed seated for a moment, letting the weight of relief sink into me. The storm I'd been weathering for weeks had finally begun to break. But storms leave debris. The following days brought a mix of peace and chaos. On one hand, Karen stopped driving across my land. No more engines roaring. No more music shaking the windows. My animals settled. My fields grew quiet again. On the other hand, the internet kept feeding on the spectacle. My farm's Facebook page exploded with followers, thousands more every day. I posted updates about crop rotations, soil drainage, even fence repair tips, and somehow people ate it up. They weren't here for farming advice. They were here for care and drama. Sponsors began reaching out. A boot company wanted me to wear their product in a Justice Farmer ad campaign. A hose manufacturer offered to send me free gear in exchange for a testimonial. My niece laughed and said, "Uncle Tom, you're practically an influencer now." I shook my head, but secretly I enjoyed the irony. Karen had wanted fame. Instead, she'd handed it to me. One afternoon, while I was patching a fence line, Harold drove up in his pickup. He leaned out the window, grinning. "Town still talking about you?" he said. "Heard calling that mud pit of yours the Karen Bog." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my hammer. Guess I should put up a sign charge admission. But beneath the humor, I felt the gravity of it. My farm had become a symbol of standing your ground, of not letting arrogance trample over hard work. Strangers messaged me stories of their own battles with HOAs, Karens, and neighbors who thought rules didn't apply to them. I realized this wasn't just my story anymore. It was bigger. Still, life moved on. Crops needed tending, animals needed feeding, seasons kept turning. The world doesn't stop for drama. Not even viral drama. Yet every time I walked past that back pasture, I'd glance at the spot where the Lamborghini sank. The soil had dried, now cracked and hardened, leaving fossilized ruts as a reminder. I kept the sprinkler system buried under the straw just in case. Weeks later, I saw Karen again. Not in court, not online, but at the grocery store. She was almost unrecognizable. Gone were the flashy clothes and designer heels. She wore plain sneakers, an oversized hoodie, and sunglasses that couldn't quite hide the slump of her shoulders. She pushed a cart slowly down the aisle, avoiding every pair of eyes that glanced her way. When our paths crossed, she froze. For a moment, her lips parted like she wanted to say something. An apology, maybe, or another threat. But no words came. She just turned away, her face burning red, and hurried toward the checkout. I didn't chase her. I didn't gloat. I just watched her go, the sound of her squeaky cartwheels echoing behind her. For the first time, Karen looked human. Not untouchable, not arrogant, just small. As I drove home that day, I realized the fight was over. The land was quiet again. The animals calm, the fences strong. Karen had finally learned what she'd refused to see all along. You don't conquer the land conquers you and me. I kept working, planting, repairing, because farms don't care about fame or viral moments. Farms care about hands and the dirt, sweat on your brow, and the steady rhythm of life. But every so often, when the sun sets over the ridge and the shadows stretch across that old pasture, I find myself smiling at the memory of justice served not by laws or courts, but by clay, water, and patience. Justice in the end doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just sinks quietly into the soil. Autumn rolled in slow and golden, the kind of season that makes a farmer pause on his porch steps and just breathe. The fields shimmered under the low sun, and for a few precious weeks it felt like life had steadied again. The animals grazed in peace. The fences stood unbroken. The roar of Karen's Lamborghini was nothing but a ghost that sometimes echoed in my memory. But ghosts don't stay buried forever. One chilly morning, I was splitting logs by the barn when my phone buzzed with another message from my niece. "Uncle Tom, you've gone viral again." She attached a TikTok link. Against my better judgment, I tapped it. There it was. Is a slickly edited documentary made by one of Karen's HOA friends. Dramatic music, slow-motion footage of Karen slipping in the mud, and a voiceover painting me as a deranged recluse who'd engineered a booby-trapped swamp to terrorize innocent women. They even spliced in grainy black and white filters like it was some kind of true crime episode. I laughed at first, but the comments chilled me. Some people bought it. They called me dangerous. They claimed I was an unstable loner armed with traps. A few even speculated I had guns hidden on the property. The internet, once my ally, had turned into a double-edged sword. By that afternoon, a reporter from a regional news outlet left a voicemail asking for my side of the story. That was when I knew Karen wasn't finished. Losing in court had bruised her pride. Now she wanted to win in the court of public opinion. I tried to ignore it, but ignoring Karen was like ignoring a storm cloud on the horizon. It never just passes. You prepare or you get soaked. Sure enough, the storm arrived in the form of 3 SUVs that pulled up to my gate one Saturday. Out stepped Karen and half a dozen HOA members, all dressed like they were marching into a boardroom instead of a pasture. They had clipboards, cameras, and smug looks plastered across their faces. Karen led the charge, phone recording voice loud and theatrical. "This," she declared to her audience, "is where it happened. This is the property of the man who tried to kill me. I stood on my porch, axe, still in hand sweat glistening on my forehead. For a moment, I considered storming down and chasing them off like a wild dog. But Vic's voice echoed in my head. Don't rise to her bait. Instead, I pulled out my own phone, set it to record, and leaned against the porch rail. You're trespassing again, Karen. I called out, my voice calm but sharp. You and your HOA circus better step off my property before I call the sheriff. Karen smirked, unfazed. This isn't trespassing. This is an inspection. We're documenting the unsafe conditions you created. The others nodded, scribbling on their clipboards like actors playing bureaucrats. I sighed, pulled out a folded piece of paper from my back pocket, and held it up. Funny, because the county judge already ruled you had no standing here, and now I've got fresh footage of you violating the order. Care to keep performing? For the first time, Karen faltered. Her phone lowered slightly. Murmurs rippled through her entourage. Some of them glanced at each other, clearly less confident than when they'd marched in. Karen recovered quickly, tossing her hair back. This isn't over, she snapped, before turning on her heel and storming back to her SUV. I recorded every second until their taillights vanished. Later that evening, I sent the footage straight to Vic, who nearly cackled through the phone. She's digging her own grave now. Keep logging everything. At this point, we'll have enough to file for a restraining order. It should have been comforting, but I couldn't shake the unease. Karen had lost her car, her lawsuit, her dignity. Now she was losing her grip. People backed into corners tend to lash out, and I had no illusions about what she was capable of when her pride was on the line. The following week proved me right. One night, just past midnight, the motion sensors I'd installed months earlier lit up across the north field. The alarm shrieked, jolting me awake. I grabbed my flashlight, heart pounding, and sprinted outside. By the time I reached the field, the intruder was gone, but the evidence remained. My fence had been slashed, wires dangling like broken ribs. A pile of garbage beer bottles, fast food wrappers, and something dead and rotting lay dumped in the pasture. The stench hit me like a fist. I yanked the trail cam card the next morning, slid it into my laptop, and there she was again. Karen, hood up, spray can in hand, grinning like a teenager caught in mischief. But this wasn't mischief. This was targeted escalating harassment. She was playing with fire, and she didn't even realize how close she was to being burned. Vic was furious when I showed him she's crossed the line. With this, we can nail her with criminal charges, destruction of property, trespassing, harassment. You've been patient long enough. And he was right. My patience had been stretched to breaking. But more than anger, I felt a strange kind of sorrow. How could someone waste so much energy on hatred on trying to destroy when she could have just stopped driving across my farm in the first place? All of this could have been avoided. Yet here we were. By the end of that week, the sheriff finally paid me a visit. This time, he wasn't shrugging or making excuses. With the pile of evidence I'd handed over, his tone had changed. "We'll look into this seriously, Tom," he said, scratching his beard. "Truth is, the whole county's tired of her antics. We've let it slide too long." I nodded, though. A part of me doubted the system would ever fully hold her accountable. Karen wasn't just an individual anymore. She was a symptom of entitlement, of arrogance backed by wealth and status, of people who thought rules applied to everyone but them. That night, I stood at the edge of the field where her Lamborghini had sunk weeks before. The soil was firm again, healed by time and work. Yet the memory lingered, etched into the land like a scar. Karen thought she could trample everything in her path. She thought her car, her money, her HOA shielded her. But in the end, the land itself had humbled her. And maybe, just maybe, it would do so again. Because this story wasn't finished yet, their straining order came faster than even Vic expected. Within 2 weeks of submitting the evidence, trail cam videos, property damage reports, the footage of Karen and her HOA cronies staging their so-called inspection, a county judge signed off. Karen was forbidden from coming within 200 yards of my land. If she set one stiletto heel past that line, the sheriff had the authority to put her in handcuffs. For the first time in months, I slept soundly. No alarms in the middle of the night. No engines rattling the windows. Just the gentle chorus of crickets and the low hum of cattle chewing in the dark. It felt like peace had finally returned. But peace, I learned, is fragile when pride is wounded. Karen disappeared from my field, sure, but she didn't disappear from the internet. She reinvented herself. She leaned into the victim narrative, posting videos where she sat in her oversized SUV, crocodile tears in her eyes, telling her followers she was harassed by a violent farmer. Her audience dwindled, but the diehards clung to her every word. They flooded my farm's page with angry comments, accusing me of cruelty, calling me a monster. At first, ignored it. Then, one evening, while checking the fence line, I noticed spray paint again. This time, not on my barn, but on the county road sign nearby. 3 words scrolled in red: "Farmer is evil." My stomach tightened. Karen herself couldn't come near me anymore, but she still had her followers. She'd turned her humiliation into a campaign, and now others were picking up the torch. I upgraded my security, more cameras, more lights, even a new locking gate at the main entrance. Harold teased me, said I was turning the farm into Fort Knox, but he also admitted the gossip in town was split. Half the folks thought I was a hero who'd stood up to entitlement. The other half, thanks to Karen's theatrics, wondered if I'd gone too far. That second half was loud. Local news ran a panel discussion about rural justice versus vigilantism. My name came up more than once. A columnist wrote a piece titled, "Did the Farmer Cross the Line?" I read it once, then used it to start the wood stove. Vic told me to hold steady. Public opinion swings like a gate in the wind. Don't chase it. Just keep living your life, keep your evidence, and let her hang herself with her own rope. He wasn't wrong, because while Karen's online crusade grew wilder, her real life was unraveling. One afternoon, I went into town for supplies. As I loaded feed bags into the truck, I overheard 2 women whispering near the checkout. "Did you hear Karen's husband finally left? Took the kids to his mother's. Can't handle the drama anymore." I didn't gloat, not out loud anyway. But inside, I couldn't help thinking the land wasn't the only thing swallowing Karen's pride. Still, I knew better than to underestimate her. She had nothing left to lose, and people with nothing left to lose can be dangerous. That truth landed on my doorstep one rainy evening. I just finished closing the barn when headlights flared at the far end of the drive. A car idled there, engine rumbling, lights cutting through the drizzle too far to see the driver, but my gut knew. I pulled my coat tighter and walked to the gate. The car didn't move. I raised my flashlight, aimed it at the windshield. For a heartbeat, I saw her. The curve of her jaw, the glint of earrings. Karen. She didn't get out, she didn't shout. She just sat there staring through the rain-speckled glass. Then, as if the sight of me was enough, she threw the car in reverse and disappeared down the road. I stood in the rain long after the memory of her silhouette burned into my mind. She'd broken the order just by being there. But I hadn't caught her on camera. No proof, just instinct. The next morning, I doubled down. I called the sheriff, filed a report, even though I knew it wouldn't go far without evidence. Then I spent the day wiring new cameras to cover the road, every angle, every approach. If she came back, there'd be no question. But she didn't come back. Not right away. Instead, Karen's campaign took a stranger turn. She began selling merchandise, shirts, mugs, even bumper stickers that read, "Justice for Karen." She branded herself as a crusader against rural tyranny. Her followers bought it up. Pictures popped up online of people wearing her slogans, posing in parking lots like they were part of a movement. It was laughable, but it was also unsettling. This wasn't just Karen anymore. It was Karen plus an army of fools who believed her narrative. And armies, even foolish ones, can cause damage. Then came the night my niece called, her voice trembling. "Uncle Tom, you need to see this." She sent me another link, a live stream. Not Karen's this time, but one of her followers. The camera showed the edge of my farm, the new gate, the warning signs, the fields stretching beyond. The voice behind the camera said, "This is where it happened. This is where he trapped her car. We're going to prove this man isn't untouchable." My blood went cold. I grabbed my keys, sped down to the gate, heart hammering. By the time I arrived, the live streamers were gone. Just muddy tire tracks and a crushed patch of grass where they'd stood. I checked the cameras, faces clear as daylight. Not Karen, but 3 young men I'd never seen before, clearly inspired by her nonsense. The sheriff didn't hesitate this time. "We'll pick him up," he promised. "Criminal trespass harassment. They'll spend a night in county lockup at least." It should have comforted me. Instead, I felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down. This fight wasn't ending. It was multiplying. Karen had lost her car, her case, her reputation, but somehow she'd turned her loss into fuel, feeding others on her own bitterness. And I knew deep down that the real climax hadn't come yet, because storms don't stop until they've broken something wide open. And Karen's storm was still circling my farm. Winter crept over the farm like a heavy quilt. Frost edged the fence posts. The cattle's breath steamed in the cold air, and each morning I had to break ice from the troughs before chores. Life should have been quiet again. But with Karen's shadow still stretching over everything, even the snow didn't bring peace. Her followers might have been young fools, but they'd lit a fuse she handed them. Every week I found some new nuisance-broken beer bottles near the ditch, trash-tossed from passing cars. Slurs painted on county signs. It wasn't constant, but it was enough to remind me Karen's storm wasn't done. The restraining order still stood. She hadn't stepped foot on my land since the night I saw her parked in the rain, but I felt her presence in every rumor, every viral post. People in town whispered that she was broke, that she sold her mansion in Chestnut Grove, that she'd been booted off the HOA board. Others said she was scheming again, plotting some kind of comeback. With Karen, rumor and reality blurred until you couldn't tell which was worse. One particularly sharp morning, I was hauling hay when Harold pulled into the yard. He rolled his window down, grinning like he had a secret. "You seen today's paper?" he asked, tossing a folded copy onto the hay bales. The headline nearly made me spit my coffee. "Karen's Day in court again, this time as defendant." Turned out one of her own followers, the same kids who trespassed on my land, had turned on her, suing her for incitement after their night in jail. They claimed Karen encouraged them, promised them justice, even fed them the idea of confronting me on camera. The case wasn't much, but the irony was rich. Karen, queen of lawsuits, was now drowning in them. I should have felt victorious. But standing in that frosty yard, the paper crinkling in my hands, I only felt tired. Victory doesn't always taste sweet. Sometimes it just tastes like relief. And yet a strange thing happened. With Karen tangled in her own mess, the noise around my farm began to towdy down. No more late-night alarms, no more graffiti. Even the online chatter slowed. People had grown bored of her sobab stories. Without fuel, the fire flickered out. Weeks passed. I focused on work, repairing a tractor, planting, spring planting, tending the animals. The world moved on. And then one afternoon in March, I saw her again. I was in the grocery store, the same place I'd spotted her once before. She stood in line ahead of me wearing plain jeans, sneakers, and a hoodie. No makeup, no live stream, no entourage, just Karen looking small and worn. She clutched a half-empty basket bread milk, a bag of off-brand cereal. For a moment, she didn't notice me. Then our eyes met. Her face flushed. She shifted on her feet, clearly torn between glaring and hiding. Finally, she muttered almost under her breath, "You ruined my life." I stared at her, really stared.
This wasn't the Karen who'd roared across my fields in a Lamborghini, laughing like she owned the world.
This was a woman cracked by her own arrogance, dragged down by the weight of battles she'd chosen. "No," I said quietly, "you ruined your life. The land just reminded you." She blinked, lips trembling as if she wanted to snap back, but nothing came. She turned away, paid for her groceries, and left without another word. I stood there in that fluorescent-lit store, the smell of old onions and disinfectant hanging in there, and I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not anger, pity. Because Karen, for all her noise, was just another person who believed the world owed her something it never did. And when the land, the law, and the truth said otherwise, she collapsed under the weight. That night I sat on the porch with a cup of black coffee, the stars sharp and clear above. The field stretched quiet, the fences strong, the animals settled. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. I thought about my father and grandfather men who'd worked this same soil long before me. They taught me that land isn't just property, it's responsibility. You respect it, care for it, and defend it when you must. And if someone tries to take advantage, you don't meet arrogance with noise. You meet it with patience, preparation, and the quiet certainty that the truth will always rise from the dirt. Karen never understood that. Maybe she never will, but I do, and that's enough. So I keep the signs fresh, the cameras rolling, the fences strong, not out of fear, but out of respect. Because this farm is more than acres and crops. It's my home, my livelihood, my legacy. And no show queen, no entitled driver, no viral circus will ever take that from me. They say karma takes years. But I've learned sometimes it only takes a patch of mud, a stubborn farmer, and the patience to let the land do the talking. And if anyone ever doubts that, well, they're welcome to test my fences. But they'd better be ready because out here the dirt remembers. If there's one lesson this whole mess with Karen taught me, it's that dignity matters more than pride and preparation matters more than anger. I could have screamed at her, fought her in the fields, met her noise with my own. But instead, I let patience and evidence do the heavy lifting. In life, people will trample your boundaries if you let them. They'll treat your kindness as weakness, your silence as permission. But there's power in standing firm and saying enough and backing it up with truth. To anyone watching this, protect what's yours but do it wisely. Don't waste yourself in petty fights. Hold your ground with dignity and let the world see you won't be pushed aside. If you've ever dealt with your own Karen or HOA nightmare, share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And if you enjoyed this tale of justice served with a muddy twist, hit subscribe. There are more stories coming and you won't want to miss the next storm when it rolls.